There are two main texts used by the pro-choice advocates to support that the Bible is pro-choice. The first one is Exodus chapter 21, verses 22 and 23. The second one is found in Numbers chapter 5, verses 11 through 31, in which I was not aware of initially. Now, I will address the Exodus passage first and then the Numbers passage. Besides these verses, when a pro-choice quotes a passage from the Old Testament in which either a woman has a miscarriage or could have a miscarriage, it is normally the result of God's judgment or some evil men doing bad things. Nowhere in the entire Bible is there a passage in which the woman chooses to have a miscarriage and the Bible supports it. There's just no reference whatsoever. All so-called references to God doing the miscarriage are not abortions. Folks, abortion is the deliberate taking of an innocent, unborn life that the mother has decided to do. There's a huge difference there. God is the one that can take life at any time because He's God. And we can only, in the eyes of God, do so to save the life of a mother, or, as in the case of Old Testament, execute judgment when God decreed that they were to do so. So when you read passages from the pro-choice advocate that say, for example, 2 Kings 8:12 says about dashing their children and rip up their women with child, or Hosea 9:16, you will slay even the beloved fruit of their womb, then know that this has nothing to do with the pro-choice position, since the mother does not choose to kill her unborn child. What we find, God is not pro-choice, since at the beginning God said what? Be fruitful and multiply. But God will bring judgment when He did so. For example, the days of Noah, Sodom and Gomorrah, etc., etc. If one wants to know God's view of the unborn, then just go to Psalms chapter 139. Now, I will get into more detail when I do an episode on whether the Bible is silent on abortion. So, what is considered the most direct reference to abortion in the Bible is Exodus chapter 21, verses 22 and 23. It says, now suppose two men are fighting, and in the process they accidentally strike a pregnant woman, so she gives birth prematurely. If no further injury results, the man who struck the woman must pay the amount of compensation the woman's husband demands and the judge approves. But if there's further injury, the punishment must match the injury, or a life for a life. Now, according to the pro-choice position, if two men get in a fight where there's a pregnant woman involved and is injured, and she ends up having a miscarriage, then the one that injured the woman is only to pay a fine. Since only the fetus died, then God does not value that life much, because the guy only has to pay a fine. That's how they're thinking. However, if a woman dies as a result from the incident when she delivers her child, then he gets the death penalty. Notice the injury was accidental and not premeditated as with abortion. Yet you can see what I'm going to bring out here. The pro-choice assumes that the fetus dies. End of story. That is as one side sees it. Yet others would argue that the passage is really saying if the mother has a miscarriage, there would be a fine, and if the mother dies, then life for life. The problem is depending on what translation is used. Some translate it as premature birth and others as a miscarriage. Yet still others translate it if the child comes out from her, which is the literal translation, but the text doesn't clarify if the child is alive or not. So here is my question on both sides of the debate. If this passage did not exist, What two passages from the Bible support your position? However, those that believe that abortion is permissible according to the Bible must provide at least two passages that support their position. Remember, Bible doctrine is based on two or more witnesses in order for it to be established. If you truly believe that this one verse proves that abortion is permissible, then you really don't have a case, and I will show why. To those that are about to scream, Numbers chapter 5, we'll get to that. Remember, while abortion is the premeditated killing of an innocent unborn child, in this passage, the circumstances is not premeditated. It's kind of like road rage, in which harm comes to a mother with child. Well, let's look at the text closely. Exodus chapter 21, verse 22 says, if men strive and hurt a woman with child. And one of the things you will say throughout the scripture, when you see pregnant women, it speaks of being with child. So, this text is for a particular situation only. It's not speaking of hitting a woman in general, but only a woman with child. There is no premeditated harm directed to the child as it is with abortion. There is no advising the mother to kill her unborn child. So even in this passage, we see there is not one scripture in the entire Bible that supports premeditated abortion. We do have, however, the account of Pharaoh demanding that any boy child be killed at birth. Also, King Herod ordered all male children killed from 2 years old and under, and both were considered wicked in the eyes of the Lord. Second, if they strike, meaning accidentally, whereas in abortion it is intentional to strike dead the unborn child. To those of the pro-choice, have you considered there was a protection granted in refugee cities to those that accidentally killed another person, whether male or female? You might be saying, what in the world has this to do with it? Stay tuned, you're going to see. Numbers chapter 35, verses 22 through 25. But suppose someone pushes another person without having shown previous hostility, or throws something that unintentionally hits another person, or accidentally drops a huge stone on someone, though there were not enemies, and the person dies. If this should happen, the community must follow these regulations in making a judgment between the slayer and the avenger, the victim's nearest relative. The community must protect the slayer from the avenger and must escort the slayer back to live in the city of refuge to which he fled. There he must remain until the death of the high priest, who was anointed with the sacred oil. However, even if it was by accident, notice that someone could receive the death penalty if severe harm came to a mother with child. So, if a man or woman was killed by another person by accident, the person that accidentally killed that man or woman can flee for safety. However, notice, if a woman with child and then her life dies, meaning the child and the woman, then a person can be put to death. Remember, only a woman with child can a person be put to death, even if it was accidental, and thus that alone proves the very value of a woman with child. For if the unborn was of less value than the person that accidentally caused harm to the woman with child, that person can flee. But according to this passage, if serious harm comes to a person, that person can be put to death, in which the only difference is the added unborn child. So let's continue. So this fight breaks out and a woman with child is struck, and then the text says, so that her fruit, thus her fruit means something born, meaning her offspring. Whether the child is dead or alive, the word used here means something born. Thus, how this is referring to abortion, since abortion is done to that which is unborn. The text continues, depart from her, literally to go or bring out. So the child will exit the womb and thus will be born. The issue in this debate for most is whether the child will be dead or alive. We're not talking about Bon Jovi, by the way. So the next step is to allow the text to determine its meaning. I'd like to get some case scenarios. Now, in verse 22, it says, if men strive, this is the beginning of our timetable. Let's call this A. There's a fight and strikes a woman with child. This is the second part of the timetable, timeline, and we will call it B. This comes at a point after the fight has started. A pregnant woman is struck in some way. Now, sometime later, so that her fruit depart from her. This could be hours, days, weeks, or even months after the incident. Now, think of a car accident where someone is struck, but even if one thinks they are okay, it may take time before one knows if there is any permanent damage. To me, this is what the context of the text is saying. Next, it states, and yet no mischief, literally in the Hebrew, hurt or translated, which is translated as injury, will follow. So at birth, we will call it C, which is vital to our understanding of the passage itself. Now, we can't determine the punishment that is to be handed out until the woman gives birth. Only then will we be able to determine if there's permanent injury in any way and what punishment should apply. Now, I want to show how poor the pro-choice position really is. Let's look at the text one more time. If men strive and hurt a woman with child so that her fruit depart from her, and yet no mischief foul, he shall surely be punished according as a woman's husband will lay upon him, and he shall pay as the judges determine. They believe that the text is stating that a woman will have a miscarriage as a result of the one that struck her by accident. He will simply pay a fine, and thus the value of the unborn life is far less, since only a fine had to be paid. So, if the text states a woman with child were to get struck, and the woman with child should be the focus of the rest of the text. Once birth has occurred, the text declares that it would determine what the penalty of the assaultant would be. Since both were involved in the alteration, then shouldn't both be involved in determining the outcome of the penalty? Both the woman and the child were involved, so they both should be involved concerning the penalty. So let's look at why their position doesn't fit the text. I want to give 3 different examples to illustrate my point. Kim has a 6-month-old baby accidentally killed. The man that did it went to a city of refuge for safety. John lost his wife. He has a 6-month-old to raise on his own. Sue, 6 months pregnant, gets hit accidentally when her husband got in a fight with another man. She appears to be okay, but dies giving birth, and so the man is put to death. Had Sue not been pregnant, the man that struck Sue could have been spared and gone to a city of refuge for protection. Finally, Stacy was 6 months pregnant, and her husband also got in a fight, and she had a miscarriage. So according to the pro-choice advocates, there would only be a fine that was to be paid out. So all 3 women had a child, some born, some unborn. While pregnant, if they die in giving birth as a result of being struck, the man that struck her dies. Yet, if they are not pregnant and are accidentally struck and killed, the man could take refuge in a city of refuge. However, if the child dies, there's just a fine according to the pro-choice supporters. So why would a person get the death penalty when a woman with child dies as a result of an accident, but the same woman were to die by accident, the man would live? You can't say the man should die because the baby will not have a mother. For the first example, the mother died and already had a child. Yet if the text is stating that at birth no hurt or injury would follow, there should be a fine, makes sense. After all, the mother would be worried if the child were to die or even he was handicapped. The second part makes sense to show the value of the unborn, since only a woman with child that dies when the man received the death penalty, even if it was by accident. Notice what the last part of the verse states. And if any mischief follow, then they shall give life for life. To me, this is simple. If there's hurt, there will be a penalty that will fit. So, in conclusion, to state that the unborn is of less value cannot explain why only a woman that is carrying the unborn in her womb will determine if a man who struck her accidentally will receive the death penalty or not. Yet that same woman, had she not been pregnant and dies by accident, the same man would not get the death penalty, but can flee to a city of refuge. So here's my question. Where in the Bible does God ordain abortion? To state the unborn is of less value is to simply not study the text that is staring you right in the face. If all are created in the image of God, then at what point does one have the image of God? For if the image of God is present at conception, then to kill the unborn person is guilty of killing. For Genesis 9:6 says it is clear that we are not to kill because we are made in the image of God. And on this verse, one final thought. If the unborn have the same value as a person that has already been born, then why could a person who accidentally killed someone could only be sentenced to death when the unborn child is involved? Next is the Numbers passage. I'm going to play a clip from YouTube, a channel called The Young Turks, in which there's a lot of passion, but not a lot of real critical thinking. And then I'm going to show how off they really are, and why this verse cannot be used to support abortion.
The Bible is actually pro-abortion. That's a fact. It's Numbers 5:11 to 31. You can read it for yourself. I'm going to read you just a very small portion of it. But if you don't believe me, that's okay. Don't even Google it. Don't trust the internet. Don't trust any research. Just go pick up your own Bible. Wherever you have a Bible, turn to Numbers 5:11 to 31. So this portion says, it's about a woman, and if you're not sure if your wife has cheated on you. If you have gone astray while married to your husband, and you have made yourself impure by having sexual relations with a man other than your husband, here the priest is to put the woman under this curse. May the Lord cause you to become a curse among your people when he makes your womb miscarry and your abdomen swell. May this water that brings a curse enter your body so that your abdomen swells or your womb miscarries. It is clear as day. There is no question about it. If you don't believe me, just go read the Bible. It is pro-abortion. It's not even pro-choice, it's pro-abortion. It says if you think your wife has cheated on you, give her a toxic potion and make sure that she has an abortion. I didn't say it. I didn't say it. Your God said it. Your God said it. Are you going to listen to it or not? Read the Bible. Read the Bible. Instead, you did something anti-biblical, and you are oppressing women on grounds that you don't even understand. And your leaders have lied to you from day one. And why did they lie to you? It was never about the Bible. The Bible says the opposite. It was always about controlling women.
Now, I did what the Young Turks told me to do. Read my Bible. Yep, the reference is Numbers chapter 11 through 31. But first of all, according to the Bible, all doctrine must be established by 2 or 3 references. So where is the other reference? At least others that have used the Exodus passage on this matter have probably used Numbers 5, but he didn't bother to even quote it. Yet the biggest problem with the Exodus passage is why if a woman is killed by accident, a person can flee to a city of refuge and not die. However, if a pregnant woman ends up dying because her husband and another man get in a fight, she is injured and dies in childbirth, then the person will also die. That's why only a woman with child would die, and not a woman who got killed by accident by another man would not die. Next, see, abortion in this debate centers on a woman's right to kill her unborn child. So all the single women and divorced women would not qualify to have a miscarriage. Think about that. And a great majority of them are single young women, by the way, in our society. So that just throws it right off. So the only ones that would qualify, quote, for this support of abortion would have to be a married woman And second, only if the husband suspects that she has cheated on him. Wow. Think about that. If she didn't cheat on him, you can't have a miscarriage, a planned miscarriage, okay? Then the husband also may not decide to go to the priest. So that really narrows it down. So she would have to cheat on her husband in order to have a miscarriage, if that's what the passage is saying, which it's not. Next, just because one or two translations mention the word miscarriage does not mean that most do. Notice the NIV, depending on what version, does, but many of them don't. And I will leave a link where you can look at 30 translations, and most of them do not say miscarriage. So there's a discrepancy right there. But they do, most do say belly or stomach will swell. But here's the key that the Young Turks leave out. But also the thigh or the leg would rot or shrivel. Really? You're going to use this as an example of God being pro-choice. Wow. This is your justification? What woman would want to go to have her leg rot? And even a husband, even if particular wife did cheat on him, some may not want to see his wife's leg rot out or shrivel up. Next, the priest would pronounce a curse, and thus, if there is a miscarriage, it is a curse. Of course, there is power in the tongue, folks. People don't say it, but according to this passage, there could be. Do the Young Turks even consider that in the beginning God said, be fruitful and multiply? Yet God is pro-abortion? Really? Also, in those days, being barren was looked down upon. Now, if God is so pro-abortion, meaning the very life that he created, he now wants to destroy, apparently that's what these folks are trying to convey, which is so false. But after all, how would this apply today? Think of it. There's no tabernacle or temple to get the dust from, or a priest to pronounce a curse. When we see miscarriage in the Old Testament, it's not speaking of God being pro-abortion, but usually of the judgment of God on sin. So, no God who created us in his image wants to pronounce a curse on people just because he feels like it. But he wants to have a relationship with us. Unfortunately, judgment does come when we rebel against him. So, to conclude, there is not one single reference in the entire Bible that shows support for elective abortion except to save the life of the mother, for that would be self-defense.